So here we have the file that we'll be cutting today. This file was saved as a PDF and is now currently open in Acrobat. This file is 18 inches tall and 32 inches wide, which is the same size as the bed of the LaserCutter. You want to make sure that this is the case so that it doesn't stretch the file in any weird way. Now let's take a closer look at the area of the file that we'll actually be cutting. So we'll go ahead and zoom in. The image is oriented in the upper left-hand corner of the file. It's where the machine has its 0 points and is situated about a 1/4 inch off of the edge of the file. As you can see here, we have some red text, which is all lines, so we're going to be performing vector operations on it. The line weight is 0.001. The green text is both lines and blocks of color, so we're going to be performing both vector and raster operations to it. And the blue text is entirely a block of color, so we're just going to be performing raster operations. The black outline we're actually going to cut out, and so that's a line, the 0.001, but we're going to be just doing a vector to that. So the next step is to click on the print button, and a dialog box will open. In this box, the first step is to change the name of the printer to X660, which is the LaserCutter. Once that changes, you'll see the 18 by 32 preview. You want to make sure that the page scaling is set to none and that the auto rotate and center box is unchecked, as you can see. From there, we're going to click on the Properties button, which will open up another dialog box. In this box, this is where you'll actually change the settings of the LaserCutter itself. So the first setting that we're going to adjust is the pen mode. The pen mode defines how the LaserCutter actually handles the lines that you're giving it. You change the pen mode by clicking on the little box next to the color that relates to that line. So the options that you have are skip, which tells the machine to do nothing, vector, which means the machine will follow the line, raster, which means the machine will go back and forth and actually etch away the block of color, and then raster vector, which will handle both lines and blocks of color of the same color. So in this case, we've set black to vector because we just have the line. Red we are also going to set to vector because we want it to follow that line. Green we're going to set to raster vector because we have both lines and blocks of color, whereas with blue we're just going to set it to raster. Everything else we can generally set to skip, or if we don't have that color in our file, it doesn't really matter. Now that we have the pen mode set, it's time to adjust the actual settings for each color. In order to select the settings, we can click multiple colors and change all of them together, but in this case we really just want to adjust one at a time. So starting with the black, we're going to be cutting this out, and in this case we're going to be using acrylic. So we're going to set the power to 75 and the speed to 3. The PPI we're going to set to 1000, which is what we always want to use for vector operations. And we're going to click the Set button. So, before we continue, let's talk about what the power, speed, and PPI settings actually are. The power is the percent of wattage that the machine can deliver. It ranges from 0 to 100. Kind of the rule of thumb with power is the more flammable material, the less power you want to be using. So for a material like paper, you may want to be using 30% to cut through, where with a material like acrylic, you may want to be using 75% to cut through. If you're just trying to etch, you'll probably want to use less power. Speed is how fast the actual head of the LaserCutter moves. So if you have this very low, the LaserCutter head will move slowly, the laser will sit on the same spot for longer, and you'll cut through more. The rule of thumb with this is kind of thickness, so the thicker materials use slower speeds, where thinner materials use faster speeds. If you're dealing with cutting, you'll probably want to be in a lower regime, probably say from about 3 to about 10. If you're etching, you'll probably be in the higher, say like a 40 to 60 range. Be aware that the lower ranges of speed do vary greatly versus the higher, so the difference between, say, a 3 and an 8 is much greater than, say, between a 60 and an 80. The PPI setting is the pixels per inch. It's sort of like a resolution. When you're doing vector operations, you always want to set this to 1,000, but when you're doing raster operations, you may want to go a little lower. It'll help with the speed. Raster operations generally take a really long period of time. There are some numbers posted, but a lot of the numbers is just sort of figuring it out as you go along. Not a bad idea, though, to kind of write stuff down if you find good numbers for something. So now let's continue and adjust the settings for the red. So the red, we're doing a vector etch. So we'll set the power to 60, and we're going to set the speed to 40. This is sort of a deeper etch setting for acrylic. We'll leave the PPI at 1,000 and click the set button. Next we'll adjust the settings for green. So this is our raster vector. So we're first going to adjust the power setting to about 50, so a slightly lighter edge. And we're going to increase the speed up to 60. This will allow it to just go a bit faster. Raster etching takes some time. And we're going to leave the PPI at 800. So now let's set the blue. So the blue is our raster etch, so it's just the block of color. So we're going to adjust this power to around 50. And we're going to set the speed to 85. This is fast enough because the raster takes a while, and so we'll adjust the PPI to 600 to also help with the speed of the raster. And we'll click the set button. So, now that we have both our power settings all set and our speed settings, if we wanted to keep these settings, say, for a later use, we can go down and click the Save button down at the bottom. This allows us to save out these settings as a .las file. You can then go back in and click Load and actually bring these settings back in for future use. So the next bit I'm about to show you is not necessarily something you have to do all the time, but may help with some troubleshooting. So we're going to go up to the Engraving Field tab. If you seem to be having some issues, it's always good to check here. You can click the maximum page size button and make sure that the width is set to 32 and that the height is set to 18. You also want to make sure that the orientation is always set to landscape. So, we can click back to our laser settings and click OK to proceed. So now that we have all our settings correct, we can click OK to send the file to the LaserCutter. Now, this progress bar should only pop up for just a moment. If it sits there for a while, you may have something wrong with your file, like lines on the edge, which tend to raise the size of the file, and it may take a little while to send. It's important to remember that the laser cutters are actually on at this time when you're sending a file. If they're not, then your file won't make it to the machine. Now that we've sent our file to the laser cutter, we can actually head over to the machine to complete the cutting process.